people who had one-night stands on September 10th of 2001, what was the next morning like? Not me but an old friend. He was spending the night with a girl in Jersey City. He lived in Brooklyn at the time. Long story short, they literally wound up watching everything happen from the roof of her building. Ooh, this noise. As a non-American, I can't even grasp what it must have been like to live anywhere in the country that day, let alone watch everything live in person. Jesus. I was 9, and I think surreal is the word. That was the day my childhood bubble burst and I realized what humanity is and what we are capable of. Tell me about it. I was in 5th grade in a predominantly white area and, being the only Middle Eastern kid, shit got rough real quick for me. Sorry you had to go through that, man. I remember for the month or so following 9/11 my dad would go over to my Muslim neighbor's house with a shotgun every night because they'd had things thrown through their windows and threats made towards the entire family. My dad and their dad are still great friends. They usually go golfing together a couple times a month. I woke up first, saw the news, and had to go back into the bedroom to wake her up and tell her what was happening. That moment felt very intense. I had the feeling I had a dire responsibility to choose my words very carefully. We spent the next few days together. Then we dated for a couple of years and got married. We're still married and have a little family. I joke with her about how 9/11 is kind of our anniversary sometimes. She doesn't think it's particularly funny. But we've both wondered aloud how much of an influence that experience of the attacks had on the seriousness of our relationship. Well, shared trauma is often something relationships are formed on, but not usually successful relationships. 9/11 is my anniversary. Was married September 11th, 1988. Found out my wife was pregnant 9/11/2001, our 13th anniversary. My son is graduating high school in 3 months and 3 days from now. I heard a rumor which may true, that this guy who worked in the WTC decided to hook up with his mistress instead of going into the office on September 11th. He had turned off his phone during the tryst, and when he turned it back on, his wife had blown up his phone, with a bazillion texts and messages. So, he calls her back, and his wife, frantic with worry and panic, answers, "OMG, where are you?" He says, "I'm at work." Why? I used to work with the guy who this actually happened to. He was in DC, so the Pentagon bombings were more what he was dealing with. It was apparently an older woman, and she immediately called her friend over to commiserate and had put his clothes in to wash, so he was trapped in the house with 2 crying women in front of the TV wearing nothing but a woman's robe. Lamau threw his clothes in the laundry. Such a cougar power move. Perfect plan to stop him leaving. She had slipped out of bed while I was still sleeping and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. I woke up to the sound of the coffee cup hitting the floor. She had turned on the news. No smartphones by this point. We just kind of laid in bed watching the news and letting her have a good cry for a while. After everything sunk in, something changed. We suddenly felt super connected. Like we had a common purpose. I got stuck with her for the next 19 years. First time I saw Fight Club was September 10th. The next day really freaked me out after that. Boy, you poor thing. And you couldn't even tell anyone about it at the time because rule number 1. It wasn't a one-night stand, but I had only been casually dating the guy for about 6 months. We lived 30 minutes outside of Manhattan, and the night of the 10th we went into the city to see some live music. He liked driving in as opposed to public transportation, so we went, saw the show, grabbed some food afterwards and drove home around 3 a.m. Ought to be 22 again. Even though I grew up right there, the NYC skyline was always stunning to me. Driving home, I took in the beautiful sight like I had done hundreds of times before. 10 a.m. the alarm clock went off, which was set to a NYC radio station. I will never forget the sheer panic of the DJ's voice. We sat straight up and listened, horrified. We were just there. We just saw those buildings 6 hours before. Turned on the TV and watched the second tower fall. We didn't say much to one another, but we both cried. I saw a side of him that I hadn't before. We left for work a little while later with fighter jets flying above. 19 years later we're married and have 4 kids. Most people don't remember this, but the week prior to September 11, 2001 was a week of heavy storms, and there were 1 to 2 building and roof collapses in New York in the prior week and month. 1 in the Lower East Side, 1 in Brooklyn I think. So the night prior, with all that heavy rain, and waking up the morning to news that something collapsed really didn't seem surprising, except that what collapsed was unexpected. It was also the summer of the Shark and Chundra levee. I remember all the shark attack reports, and apparently there were fewer than usual. It was just a slow news cycle. If I recall, Jackie Chan was scheduled to film a fight scene for a movie the morning of 9/11 on the rooftop, but something caused them to reschedule. There would also be no Family Guy. If Seth MacFarlane had taken the flight he was supposed to, he would have wound up in the towers. Fun fact, both my parents were in the military at the time. If it wasn't for 9/11, then they would have never been stationed at the same military base, never have met, and I would have never been born. Hush now, don't remind us how old we are that someone born after an event we remember is old enough to tell us about it here. It's not just that they're old enough to tell us about it here, they could be adults at this point. I deployed to Afghanistan with people who couldn't remember 9/11, and there are guys over there now who weren't even born yet. I actually lost my virginity on September 10, 2001. I was a junior in high school and woke up the next morning excited to tell my buddies about my night. I didn't know about the attacks until I got to school and our teacher was listening to the news. Obviously my news took a back seat to the attacks, until lunchtime. A few of us were at the lunch table talking about the attacks, and during a pause in the conversation, I mentioned that my girlfriend and I had gone all the way last night. Thinking I would maybe get a nice or well done sir type comment, my buddies just started blaming me and my actions for killing thousands of people. I was woken up with a raging hangover, beside a questionable girl, by my phone ringing. On the other end was a friend who is not known for being overly excitable, practically screaming that I had to turn on the TV immediately. Myself and the questionable girl wandered into the living room where her flatmates were getting ready for work. We turned the TV on while my friend kept repeating, well, what do you think? I remember the TV taking ages to warm up. Remember when TVs had to do that? And then it taking a long time to come into focus. I couldn't tell if it was my eyes or the TV that didn't focus quickly enough. The fog of whichever cleared just in time to see the second plane appear on the screen, and then seconds later the impact. My first question to my friend was, is this a movie? What is this? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He replied, this is real. This is happening. Hangover cleared quickly after that. Seeing those people jumping to save themselves from flames was hard to watch. The reality that this was probably their best option at that point. All of it left me stunned. I knew the world would never be the same. Even in Ireland, a country perpetually neutral in international conflict, things would never be the same. I honestly can't even remember what happened with the questionable girl after that. We probably went back to the pub. I was 21 and just finished college, with no real responsibilities. But I'd be guessing. I got laid because of the 9/11 attacks. Quite literally, I would not have met this woman if not for the attacks. She knocked on my door asking to watch the news because she was from NY and didn't have a TV of her own. We had lunch, smoked some pot and watched NY burn. We spent the whole day together. I got ghosted by a girl a week before 9/11. After it, she resurfaced to ask if I lived. I worked in that area. After I confirmed that I did, she re-ghosted me. That's my 9/11 romance story. Do you live? I do. My work here is done. I return to the shadows. There was a girl on a lot of missing posters back then. She went missing on September 11th but didn't have any reason to be at the towers. Around 2011, they finally learned that she had a one-night stand with a guy who worked in the towers and brought him lunch the next day. terrible timing. She was from a conservative Indian family, so hadn't told them where she was. I woke up to a phone call from my mom, who didn't know where I was, saying we've been bombed. I was a teen at the time and thought we were all just going to die. The weirdest part of that day was how everything turned into a ghost town. Driving home. No cars. Everything was closed. It felt like everyone died and I had missed it. I've never felt that same fear since that day. Interesting story. When it happened, I was in class taught by what I remember was the former director of USAID for South America. He was teaching a class on how global wealth inequality would lead to religious extremism and was talking about the rise of terrorism from both Christians and Muslims organizations. My friend called me in the middle of class. I had a pretty sweet flip phone made by some Scandinavian company. I got a stern looking at for having my phone ring in class, because she kept calling. Finally I answered and she said we were attacked and we were at war and they think they are going to attack Pittsburgh. This was a worry at the time, I forget why, and we saw tons of people outside the doors in the hallways and that was that. I had a one-night stand a few weeks later and accidentally got the girl pregnant. Our daughter was born a month early and wound up being born in June 12, 2002. At the time, don't know if this still stands, there were more children born in America that day than any in history. To answer the inevitable question in advance, it worked out. We've been happily married since 2003 and have 3 daughters. An accident turned into divine fortune. Anybody remember the morning of September 11th? Leave a comment. And subscribe to this channel if you wanna see more same videos.